The dim light in the room flickered like a nervous heartbeat, casting jittery shadows that seemed to move on their own. The air was heavy, thick with the metallic tang of blood, and something else, still suffocating. The kind of smell that clings to your skin and refuses to leave. Somewhere, water dripped in slow, mocking intervals, each drop echoing like a reminder of time slipping away. Sarah's head throbbed with a deep pulsating pain, as if someone had driven nails through her skull. She could feel the dried crust of something on her cheek. Blood. Maybe her own. Maybe someone else's. Her eyelids were heavy, reluctant to open, but when she finally forced them apart, the world she woke into was a nightmare. A man's face was inches from hers. His eyes were open wide, glassy and lifeless, his skin a pale grayish tone that told her he had been dead for hours. His mouth hung slightly open, as though caught mid-breath, before the life was stolen from him. She jolted back instinctively, only to feel the cold bite of iron around her wrists. Her arms were pulled behind her, chained to the back of a metal chair. Her gaze darted wildly around the room, heart hammering, lungs struggling for breath. She wasn't alone, but not in the way she wanted. There were bodies everywhere. A woman slumped in a chair in the far corner, head twisted at an unnatural angle. Two men sprawled on the dusty floor, their limbs tangled together as though they'd fallen mid-struggle. In the corner nearest her, a small, unmoving figure lay half-covered by a blood-soaked sheet. She didn't dare look closer to see if it was a child. Her pulse roared in her ears. She yanked at the chains, metal scraping against metal, but they didn't budge. Her shoulders ached from the awkward position, and a cold realization began to sink in. Someone had put her here. Someone had chosen to leave her alive when everyone else wasn't. The bulb above her flickered again, plunging the room into brief darkness before sputtering back to life. Each time it went out, her breath caught, afraid that when it came back on she would see someone standing right in front of her. Her mind clawed for answers. Where was she? How had she gotten here? She remembered a bar dimly lit, music too loud to think. A drink. Someone handed her. A smile from a man she didn't know. Then nothing. Just a black void, until she woke up here, surrounded by death. Her eyes lifted to the far wall. A small black dome sat in the upper corner, a blinking red light underneath it. A camera. Someone was watching her. "Hello," she croaked, her voice rasping from a throat that felt like sandpaper. No answer. Her gaze drifted to the door. It was old, heavy, reinforced with metal strips. No handle on her side, no windows. Just a single keyhole and the faint outline of a bolt. Whoever had locked it had no intention of letting her out. Then she heard it, the sound that made her blood run cold. From the other side of the door came the slow, deliberate turn of a key in the lock. The sound wasn't hurried, it was patient, methodical, almost savoring the moment. Sarah's breath caught. She glanced at the bodies again, as if to remind herself what happened to the others who had been here before her. Her wrists twisted in the cuffs, skin burning as she tried to force her hands free. The lock clicked once. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. The lock clicked again, louder this time. Her mind raced. Was this her chance to plead, to beg for her life? Or was this the moment she joined the others? The door creaked, the sound slow and agonizing. A thin strip of light appeared in the crack, spilling across the floor like a blade. She didn't blink, couldn't blink. The door began to open wider, inch by inch, and then just before the figure on the other side stepped into view, the light bulb above her went out. The darkness was absolute, swallowing every outline, every shadow, until Sarah couldn't even see her own knees. Her breath quickened, each inhale loud enough in her own ears to sound like a scream. She strained to listen over the pounding of her heartbeat, and in the void she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps entering the room. Slow, measured, the kind of steps someone takes when they already know exactly where you are. The chain around her wrists felt heavier now, pulling her into stillness. She didn't want to move, didn't want the sound of metal rattling to give away her position. Not that it mattered. Whoever was in here knew exactly where to find her. She felt the presence before she saw it, the shift in the air, the faint scent of something sharp and chemical riding the stale atmosphere. Then the bulb sputtered back to life with a sickly buzz. The light was dimmer this time, weaker, but it was enough to see the shape standing in the doorway. A tall man, his face hidden behind a plain white mask. No features, no eyes, just a smooth oval with two black holes where his vision must have been. He wore dark clothing, heavy boots that clicked softly against the concrete floor. In his right hand, he held something long and thin, gleaming under the weak light. Sarah's chest tightened. A knife, not a kitchen knife, but a blade designed for precision, its edge clean and sharp, its tip slightly curved. The man stepped forward, and with each footfall her body tensed further. She tried to form words, but they caught in her throat, stuck somewhere between terror and disbelief. Finally, she forced out a shaky, "Who are you?" No answer, just the sound of his breathing, slow and deliberate, the rhythm of someone in complete control. He walked past her at first, eyes or whatever lay behind those black holes sweeping over the other body. He crouched near the two men on the floor, nudged one with his boot, then stood again, his head tilted slightly as he regarded Sarah like a predator deciding if the prey before him was worth the chase. She felt her whole body trembling, the cold seeping into her bones. She tried to make herself small, to vanish into the chair, but the chains bit into her skin with every movement. Finally, he spoke, his voice muffled and distorted behind the mask. "You're awake sooner than I expected." The words were calm, almost casual, but they sent ice through her veins. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice breaking. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took slow steps toward the small figure under the sheet in the corner. He reached down and pulled the fabric back. Sarah's breath caught sharply when she saw the face, young, barely in his teens, eyes closed, lips pale. There was no visible wound, but the stillness was absolute. The masked man let the sheet fall back and turned toward her again. "They didn't wake up," he said simply, as though stating a fact about the weather. "But you're different." Sarah's mind spun, searching for meaning in his words. Different how? He ignored the question. Instead, he moved to the wall and adjusted the camera, angling it so that it pointed directly at her. Then he stepped behind it, just out of her line of sight. The red light blinked steadily, recording every twitch of her face, every shallow breath. "You're going to tell me what you saw," he said from the shadows. Her brow furrowed. "What I saw, I don't lie." His voice sharpened now, an edge of something dangerous creeping in. "You were there, you saw it. I don't even know where I am," she shouted, the panic finally breaking through her fear. There was a long pause, then the sound of his boots on the floor again, closer this time. He came into view, standing over her, the knife glinting just inches from her cheek. "You will," he said softly. Her breath came in ragged bursts, and she felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "Please, I don't remember anything, I swear." He tilted his head again, studying her. Then, without warning, he leaned in close, so close, she could feel the heat of his breath through the mask. "Memory is a fragile thing," he murmured, "but fear brings it back." And then the knife flashed. She flinched, certain he was going to stab her, but instead, he slashed through the chain binding her right wrist. The sudden release made her jerk in surprise. Before she could react, he grabbed her freed arm and yanked her to her feet. Her legs were unsteady, weak from however long she had been sitting there. He didn't give her time to adjust, just shoved her toward the door. Beyond it was a narrow hallway, dimly lit, lined with peeling paint,
and doors that were all shut tight. The air here was colder, with a faint draft that whispered along the back of her neck. He pushed her forward, guiding her with the tip of the knife pressed lightly against her spine. "Where are you taking me?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "You'll see," he said again, that maddening calm returning. They moved in silence for what felt like forever, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the narrow space. Finally, he stopped in front of a door. Unlike the others, it was heavier, reinforced, with a small barred window near the top. He pulled a key from his pocket, unlocked it, and shoved it open. Inside was a room smaller than the one she'd woken in, but somehow more suffocating. The walls were lined with photographs, hundreds of them taped in haphazard rows. Faces stared out from every angle, some smiling, some mid-laugh, others looking directly at the camera with expressions that could almost be mistaken for fear. Sarah stepped inside slowly, her eyes scanning the wall. She didn't recognize any of them, until she did. Near the center, among dozens of strangers, was a photograph of herself. She was standing in the bar, drink in hand, smiling at someone off camera. Her stomach dropped. The masked man closed the door behind them with a heavy thud. "You were supposed to be next," he said quietly, but something changed. Her eyes locked on his. What changed? His silence was worse than any answer could have been. And then from somewhere deep within the building, a loud crash echoed, followed by the sound of footsteps running toward them. The masked man's head snapped toward the door. Without another word, he reached for her arm again. This time, his grip was tighter.
The footsteps were coming fast now, pounding through the hallway like a countdown. Sarah didn't understand. The masked man's grip on her arm was so tight, it felt like his fingers might leave bruises. He yanked her toward the far corner of the photograph-covered room, where an old metal cabinet stood slightly ajar. Without hesitation, he pulled it open, revealing a narrow gap in the wall behind it, an opening just wide enough for a person to slip through sideways. "Move," he ordered, shoving her toward it. Sarah hesitated. The darkness beyond the opening looked endless, and every instinct told her not to step into it. But the pounding footsteps outside the room were closing in, and the masked man's knife pressed against her back left her with no choice. She squeezed into the narrow passage, the rough edges of the wall scraping her arms as she shuffled forward. The masked man followed, pulling the cabinet closed behind them, sealing off the room. The footsteps outside reached the door, and she heard it slam open. Voices, 2, maybe 3, filtered through the thin wall. "She's not here. Check the other rooms." Door was unlocked. "He's been here." Sarah froze, straining to catch every word. Whoever these people were, they didn't sound like rescuers. Their voices were sharp, hurried, like predators who'd just missed their prey. The masked man leaned close to her ear. "Keep moving," he whispered, the warmth of his breath seeping through the thin fabric of her shirt. The passage twisted and narrowed, the air becoming heavier with each step. Somewhere above them, pipes rattled, carrying the faint hum of machinery. The ground beneath her feet was uneven, littered with debris. At one point, she tripped over something and nearly fell, but his hand clamped on her shoulder, steadying her. After what felt like minutes of squeezing through suffocating darkness, they emerged into another room. This one was larger, its ceiling lost in shadow, the only light coming from a single bare bulb, hanging by a frayed cord. It swayed slightly, casting dizzying arcs of light over the space. The room was empty except for a table in the center, and several large crates stacked against the far wall. The masked man locked the door behind them, then finally released her arm. Her skin throbbed where he'd been gripping it. "Who were they?" she demanded, her voice sharper now that she had space to breathe. He ignored the question, walking to one of the crates and prying it open with a crowbar. Inside were more photographs, bundled together with twine, along with stacks of VHS tapes, their labels faded and smudged. He pulled one out, turned it over in his hands, and looked at her through the mask. "Do you want to see?" he asked. She didn't answer,
He set the tape on the table and crossed to an old TV and VCR in the corner. The screen crackled to life, static, hissing, until he slid the tape in. The footage was grainy, black and white, but clear enough to see the setting. A room almost identical to the one she'd woken up in. Her breath hitched as she saw people tied to chairs, just like she had been, 3 of them, heads hanging, breathing shallow. The camera panned slowly, methodically, before stopping on a 4th chair. It was empty. "That's where you were supposed to be," the masked man said quietly. Sarah's stomach twisted. "Why wasn't I?" He tilted his head slightly as if considering whether to answer. "Because someone got to you first." She felt her blood run cold. "Got to me." He paused the tape and walked toward her. "Do you remember leaving the bar?" She shook her head. I remember a drink, a man smiling at me, and then nothing." "That man," he said, "wasn't with me." Sarah stared at him. "Then who?" A loud bang rattled the door, cutting her off. The masked man snapped his head toward it, his body suddenly tense. Another bang followed, the metal groaning under the impact. "They found us," he muttered. He crossed to one of the crates, pulled out a small duffel bag, and slung it over his shoulder. Then he was at her side, gripping her arm again. "We're leaving." She yanked back. "I'm not going anywhere with you. You could be. You want to take your chances with them," he snapped, pointing toward the door as another crash echoed through the room. The sound of splintering wood made her flinch. Against every instinct, screaming in her head, she nodded, and he dragged her toward another exit she hadn't noticed. A hatch in the floor, its edges hidden beneath a layer of dust and old rags. He yanked it open, revealing a steep metal ladder leading down into darkness. A foul smell rose up from below, a mix of rot and stagnant water. "Go," he ordered. Her hands gripped the cold metal rungs, and she began to climb down, each step echoing in the confined shaft. The masked man followed, closing the hatch above them. Just as the door to the room above gave way with a deafening crash, they descended into pitch blackness. Somewhere below, water dripped steadily, and the air was damp enough to cling to her skin. Her foot finally found solid ground, and she stepped off the ladder into ankle-deep water. The masked man landed beside her with a splash. A faint light appeared ahead, flickering through the darkness like a beacon. They moved toward it, the narrow tunnel forcing them single file. As they walked, Sarah's mind churned. Who were the people upstairs? If they weren't with him, and he wasn't the one who took her from the bar, then why was she here? And why was she still alive when everyone else was dead? The tunnel opened into a small underground chamber. The light came from a single lantern, perched on a crate. Around it were more of those photographs, laid out in neat rows on the damp floor. Sarah knelt, scanning the faces. Some were familiar from the walls above, but others were new. Her chest tightened when she saw one in particular. It was her. Again, but this time not from the bar. This time, she was sitting on a bus, staring out the window. She didn't remember anyone taking it. She looked up at the masked man. "How long have you been watching me?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned his head toward the tunnel they'd come from, his body going still. From the distance came the sound of footsteps splashing through water. Multiple sets, getting closer. He grabbed the lantern, killed the light, and the chamber plunged into darkness again. "Don't move," he whispered. The footsteps stopped. Silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. Then, from the shadows behind her, a voice spoke, one she didn't recognize. "Found you." The voice came from just behind her, so close that the breath carrying the words stirred the damp air by her ear. Sarah's body locked in place, every muscle freezing as her mind screamed at her to move, to run, to do anything but stand there. The masked man reacted first. She felt his hand close around her wrist in the darkness, firm and urgent, pulling her sideways. Her shoes sloshed through the ankle-deep water, the sound far too loud in the tunnel's silence. Behind them, the unseen speaker laughed softly, low, almost amused. Then the footsteps started again, quicker this time, splashing hard as they gave chase. Sarah stumbled in the pitch black, her free hand scraping the damp wall to keep herself steady. The masked man didn't slow, dragging her along at a pace that made her breath come in sharp bursts. The tunnel twisted left, then right, the turns disorienting her. She couldn't tell if they were doubling back or moving deeper into the underground labyrinth. The only sound was the pounding of their pursuers and the occasional metallic clang of something loose, hanging from the ceiling. Her shoulder slammed into a pipe, sending a jolt of pain through her arm, but she kept moving. A dim light appeared ahead, a faint yellow glow spilling through the cracks in a warped wooden door. The masked man pushed forward, reached it, and shoved it open. They tumbled into a larger chamber, this one drier and lined with stone, instead of damp brick. The air was stale but warmer, with a faint scent of something burnt. In the center of the room stood a large metal drum, blackened by fire, surrounded by piles of charred debris. Papers, photographs, and scraps of clothing had been reduced to ashes. Against one wall, an old metal table was bolted to the floor, its surface covered in knives, pliers, and other tools whose purpose she didn't want to imagine. He kicked the door shut behind them and dragged a heavy beam across it, wedging it into place. The sound of footsteps outside stopped abruptly, replaced by silence. Then, a single knock, slow, deliberate. Sarah's heart pounded in her ear. She looked at the masked man, but he ignored her, crossing the room to a second exit on the far side. This door was smaller, made of reinforced steel, with a complex locking mechanism. He began turning the levers and sliding bolts, his movements methodical despite the urgency. The knock came again, louder this time, followed by a voice, the same one from the tunnel. "You can't keep her. You know the rules." Sarah's breath caught. The masked man froze for just a second before answering, his voice low but firm. "She's not yours." A pause. Then the voice replied, almost amused, "Everyone's mine eventually." A cold shiver ran down Sarah's spine. She stepped closer to the masked man. "Who is that?" she whispered. "Not now," he muttered, unlocking the final bolt. He pulled the steel door open, revealing another passageway, this one narrower, but with a faint draft that carried the smell of fresh air. She didn't think, she just stepped through, desperate for anything that wasn't darkness and water. The masked man followed, closing the door behind them. They moved quickly, the narrow stone corridor sloping upward. She could see light ahead now, brighter than anything they'd encountered so far. Her chest tightened at the thought that they might actually be getting out, but the hope was short-lived. A loud metallic crash echoed from behind them, the sound of the wooden beam on the first door being shattered. Whoever was after them had gotten in. The masked man cursed under his breath and picked up the pace, forcing her into a near. The light grew stronger, filtering through a grate set high in the wall. Beyond it, she could see the night sky, a patch of deep blue, dotted with stars. The grate was rusted, the bars thick but corroded. The masked man stopped, reached into his bag, and pulled out a crowbar. "Climb," he ordered. She hesitated. "Up there, yes. Now." He wedged the crowbar between the bars and began to pry. The metal groaned, flakes of rust falling into his hand. Sarah found footholds in the wall's uneven stones, and began to climb, her fingers scraping against the rough surface. She reached the grate just as one of the bars snapped loose under his effort. Another crash came from the passage behind them, closer this time. Footsteps followed, echoing off the stone. The masked man handed her the crowbar. "Finish it," he said, boosting her higher. Her arms shook with effort. As she pried at the next bar, it gave way suddenly, clattering to the ground. She worked at another, her palms slick with sweat, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The footsteps were nearly at the bend, in the tunnel now. "Go," he shouted. On the other side, she landed in damp grass, the cold night air hitting her face like a slap. She looked down through the grate, and saw him still below, holding the crowbar like a weapon. "Come on," she urged, but he didn't. Instead, he stepped back into the shadows. As the first of their pursuers rounded the corner, she saw only a flash of movement, a glint of steel, and then the sound of metal striking metal. The masked man glanced up at her through the grate. "Run," he said simply. "I'm not leaving you. Run." The force in his voice made her flinch. She hesitated for only a second before turning and sprinting across the open ground. Tall grass whipped at her legs, and the uneven earth threatened to trip her with every step. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to put as much distance between herself and that tunnel as possible. Behind her she heard muffled sounds, grunts, the clang of metal, a short sharp cry, then silence. She kept running until her lungs burned, and her legs threatened to give out. The ground sloped upward, and she found herself at the edge of a wooded area. She ducked into the trees, leaning against a trunk to catch her breath. The night was quiet here, save for the rustle of leaves in the wind. She strained her ears for any sign of pursuit, but heard nothing. Then from somewhere deeper in the woods came a sound that made her blood run cold. A slow clap, 3 beats, deliberate. She turned toward it, her heart pounding. A figure stepped out from between the trees, tall and thin, his face obscured by shadow. "You made it out," the figure said, his voice unmistakably the same as the one from the tunnel. Sarah backed away, but her foot caught on a root, and she stumbled. The figure stepped closer, the moonlight revealing a pale face, with sharp features, and eyes that seemed to glint unnaturally. "He can't keep you safe," the man said softly. "No one can." Sarah's breath came in short, panicked bursts. "What do you want from me?" The man smiled faintly. "Only what's already mine." Before she could respond, a distant shout echoed through the trees. The masked man's voice. It was urgent, commanding. "Sarah, run." The pale man's expression didn't change. Too late, and then the world went black.
When her eyes opened again, she was lying on her back, staring up at a ceiling she didn't recognize. The light above her was dim and yellow, casting a sickly glow over cracked plaster. The smell was the first thing that hit her, something sharp and antiseptic, mixed with the faint coppery tang of blood. Her head throbbed with a dull ache, and when she tried to sit up, a wave of dizziness pulled her back down. The room was small, windowless, and empty except for the narrow bed she was on, and a single metal chair in the corner. A low hum came from somewhere beyond the walls, mechanical and constant, like the steady whir of a generator. Her wrists and ankles were free, but her limbs felt heavy, sluggish. She realized with a start that whatever had knocked her out hadn't fully worn off. She sat up slowly, scanning the corners. No camera in sight this time, no visible doors except one, heavy and metal, with no handle on her side. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed, the cold concrete floor biting at her bare feet. The memories from before came back in jagged flashes. The woods, the pale man's face, the masked man's shout. Then, nothing. She was about to stand when the sound of a lock turning froze her in place. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. Not the masked man, not the pale stranger, but someone entirely new. He was tall, wearing a dark suit that looked expensive, but oddly worn at the edges, like it had seen more years than it should have. His hair was slicked back, and his eyes were a strange, piercing gray. He carried a clipboard under one arm, glancing at it, before looking directly at her. "You've been causing quite a stir," he said in a voice that was calm but carried an undercurrent of something colder. Sarah didn't answer. Her muscles tensed to run even though there was nowhere to go. He stepped closer, pulling the chair from the corner and setting it a few feet from the bed. Sitting down, he crossed one leg over the other and studied her like a specimen under glass. "You've met 2 of them already," he said, his tone almost conversational. "The man in the mask and the one in the trees. I imagine neither left a good impression." Sarah swallowed, her voice hoarse. "Who are you?" He ignored the question. "Most people don't survive an encounter with either of them. You've survived both. That makes you interesting." "I don't want to be interesting," she snapped, A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. And yet, here you are. He set the clipboard on his lap and flipped through the pages. Do you remember the night you disappeared? Her mind fought through the fog. I was at the bar. Someone gave me a drink. Then, I woke up tied to a chair. And before the bar, she frowned. Before, I went to work, came home. Nothing unusual. He glanced up at her, his eyes catching the dim light in a way that made them seem almost metallic. Memory can be selective. Sometimes it forgets things that are too inconvenient. What are you talking about? Instead of answering, he closed the clipboard and leaned forward. Do you know why they want you? Sarah's pulse spiked. Who are they? The man in the mask calls himself a custodian, he said, as if the title explained anything. The pale one. Well, his name changes often. Their methods are different, but their goals are the same. She shook her head, trying to process. I don't know either of them. I've never met them before this. That's what you think, he said quietly. Before she could respond, the sound of distant shouting filtered through the walls. It was muffled, but she could make out a voice she recognized. The masked man. Her heart jolted. The man in the suit didn't react, as if he had been expecting it. He stood, smoothing the wrinkles from his jacket. It seems your custodian is here for you. This should be interesting. He moved to the door, pausing with his hand on the frame. If I were you, I'd start remembering. Quickly. Then he stepped out, closing the door behind him. The shouting grew louder, accompanied by the heavy thud of footsteps, and the metallic groan of something being forced open. Sarah stood, her body still unsteady, and backed against the wall. The door burst open. The masked man filled the frame, breathing hard, his clothes streaked with dirt, and what looked like blood. His eyes, visible now through the holes in the mask, locked on hers. Come on. She hesitated only for a second before moving toward him. He grabbed her hand, not as roughly as before, and pulled her into the hallway. The air here was cooler, and the lighting was brighter, but the place still felt wrong. The walls too clean, the silence too heavy. They ran, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the sterile walls. Behind them, an alarm began to wail, red lights flashing along the ceiling. Where are we? She shouted over the noise. Not where you want to be, he said without looking back. They rounded a corner, and nearly collided with two men in dark uniforms. The masked man moved fast, slamming one against the wall and sweeping the legs out from under the other. He didn't slow, pulling Sarah past the crumpled bodies. The hallway ended at a large set of double doors. He kicked them open, revealing a wide loading area with a single truck backed up to the dock. The back was open, empty. In, he ordered. Sarah climbed into the truck bed, the metal floor cold under her hands and knees. He followed, slamming the doors shut from the inside. In the darkness, she could hear his breathing, fast but controlled. The truck jolted forward, the engine's growl vibrating through the walls. She sat against the side, trying to steady her breathing. After a long silence, she spoke. Why are you helping me? He didn't answer right away. Because if they take you back, you won't come out again. Who are they? She pressed. He shifted, the leather of his gloves creaking. People who collect things. People who don't let go of what they claim. And right now, they think you belong to them. Her skin prickled. Why me? Again. That pause. Because you've seen something you weren't supposed to see, even if you don't remember it yet. She stared into the darkness, where his voice came from. Then tell me what it is. I can't, he said. You have to remember it yourself. That's the only way it matters. The truck slowed, then stopped. He stood and moved to the doors, cracking them open, just enough to peer out. Stay here, he said, then dropped down into the night. Sarah waited,
every muscle taut. She heard footsteps crunching on gravel, voices low and tense. Then, without warning, the sound of a gunshot shattered the quiet. She jumped, heart hammering. The masked man's voice rang out, urgent, angry, but she couldn't make out the words. Then suddenly, a different voice, much closer, spoke right beside her ear from the darkness inside the truck. "Told you," it whispered. "No one can keep you safe." Sarah froze, every nerve in her body locking at the sound of the voice. It was low, almost conversational, but there was a chill in it that cut deeper than the cold metal walls of the truck. She whipped her head toward the sound, eyes straining in the dark, but saw nothing. No movement, no shadow, just the pitch black of the enclosed space. Her breathing quickened. "Who's there?" she demanded, though her voice cracked halfway through. For a moment, there was no reply, then a soft chuckle. "It's not important who I am. What's important is that you stop thinking that man in the mask is your savior. He's not here for you. He's here for what's in your head." She pressed back against the wall, searching for the faintest outline of the intruder. "There's nothing in my head. I don't know anything." "Oh, you do," the voice replied smoothly. "You just don't remember yet, but they'll make sure you do, one way or another. And when you do," the voice cut off abruptly, replaced by the metallic screech of the truck doors being yanked open from the outside. Light poured in, and the masked man appeared, breathing hard, his gloves smeared with dirt and blood. His gaze swept the interior, landing on her instantly. "Get out, now." Sarah scrambled toward the open doors, glancing over her shoulder into the dark corner where the voice had come from. It was empty. No one there. No move. She climbed down, her legs unsteady, the gravel beneath her crunching softly. They were in what looked like an abandoned truck yard. Rows of rusting vehicles, piles of scrap metal, and chain-link fencing topped with curling barbed wire. The air smelled faintly of oil and rain-soaked concrete. "Move," the masked man ordered, his tone clipped. They weaved between the hulks of forgotten trucks, until they reached the far fence. He crouched, pulling a small pair of wire cutters from his belt, and began snipping through the links. Sarah knelt beside him, her voice low but urgent. "There was someone in the truck with me." He didn't pause. "No, there wasn't. I heard them. They spoke to me." "Your mind's playing tricks," he said sharply, finishing the last cut and pushing the metal back enough for them to slip through. She wanted to argue, but something about the finality in his tone kept her quiet. They slipped into a narrow alley that smelled of damp brick and trash, the sound of distant city traffic echoing faintly. As they moved deeper into the shadows, her thoughts kept circling back to the voice. Whoever it was had known things they shouldn't, and they were right about one thing. She was starting to wonder about the masked man's motives. They emerged onto a dimly lit side street lined with shuttered storefronts. The masked man led her toward a rusted metal door set into the side of an old brick building. He pulled a key from his pocket, unlocked it, and ushered her inside. The interior was a small, cramped apartment, bare walls, a single table, with 2 chairs, a couch pushed against the far wall, and a bed in the corner. The only light came from a flickering bulb overhead. "This is safe?" she asked skeptically. "For now," he replied, locking the door behind them. He removed his mask, revealing a face that was surprisingly young, though hardened by lines of exhaustion, and something deeper regret maybe. His hair was dark and cropped short, his eyes sharp and watchful. "You need to rest," he said, moving to the small kitchenette and filling a glass of water. Sarah took the glass, but didn't drink right away. "I need answers. You keep telling me to remember, but I don't even know what I'm supposed to be remembering. Why are they after me?" He sat at the table, leaning forward. "You saw something that wasn't meant for you, and now both sides want you. One to keep it hidden, the other to use it." Her stomach tightened. "What did I see?" "If I tell you," he said quietly, It won't mean anything. You'll doubt it. You'll think it's just a story. But if you remember it yourself, it will be real. And once it's real, you'll understand why they'll do anything to get you back. She stared at him. Frustration built. You're telling me to just wait until my brain magically coughs up some memory. It's already starting, he said. Flashes, feelings, little moments that don't make sense. When you get one, don't push it away. Follow it. She thought about the brief, hazy images she'd had. An unfamiliar hallway, the glint of a surgical tray, voices speaking in a language she didn't know. They had come to her in dreams, fragments she'd dismissed as stress. The sound of footsteps outside snapped them both to attention. The masked man's eyes narrowed, and he rose silently. Moving to the door, he pressed his ear against it, listening. 3 slow, deliberate knocks echoed through the small space. He motioned for her to stay quiet, but she could feel her pulse thudding in her ears. The knocks came again, louder this time. The masked man drew a small pistol from under his jacket, his voice barely above a whisper. Go to the back. Now. She slipped into the narrow hallway at the rear of the apartment, the air growing colder as she moved toward a small back door. She paused, straining to hear. A third series of knocks, followed by a voice low, almost mocking. You can't hide her forever. Her blood ran cold. It was the same voice from the truck. The masked man opened the front door just a crack, and in that instant, the rear door behind Sarah exploded inward, slamming her to the floor. She scrambled back, her palms scraping against the rough wooden board. A figure stepped over the broken frame. A tall, thin man with unnaturally pale skin, and eyes so light they seemed almost colorless. He smiled, but it was a smile without warmth. Hello again, he said softly. Sarah tried to push herself up, but he was already reaching for her, his long fingers curling around her wrist. The skin where he touched burned cold, sending a shiver racing up her arm. The masked man's voice shouted from the front, followed by the deafening crack of gunfire. The pale man didn't even flinch. He's a distraction, he said. He doesn't matter. Sarah kicked out, catching him in the knee. He stumbled, and she tore free, bolting toward the side of the apartment. Her eyes caught the faint outline of a trapdoor in the floor near the bed. Without thinking, she yanked it open and dropped into the darkness below. The space beneath was cramped, smelling of dust and damp earth. She landed hard, the impact jolting through her leg. Above, the pale man's footsteps moved across the floor, slow and deliberate, as if he could hear her breathing. She pressed herself against the wall, every muscle trembling. Her mind flickered with another image. Bright white light, the sound of liquid dripping into a metal basin, and a voice whispering, "She's not ready yet." The memory was gone as quickly as it came, leaving her gasping in the dark. Then from above, the pale man's voice drifted down, soft and taunting. "It's coming back, isn't it?" The gunfire stopped. Silence pressed in, heavy and suffocating. Sarah held her breath, straining to hear. A moment later, the trapdoor creaked, and a shadow fell across her. It wasn't the pale man. It was the masked man, blood on his jacket, eyes fierce. "Come on," he said. "We have to go, now." She didn't ask questions. She climbed up, her hands shaking, and they ran together through the back, into the freezing night. Behind them, from somewhere deep inside the building, the pale man's voice followed, calm and certain. "You can't run from what's in your head, Sarah. You will remember." And for the first time she believed him.
The wind outside howled like a living thing, rattling the cracked windows in the corners of the basement. The air was colder now, carrying a damp chill that seeped into Sarah's bones. Her breathing was shallow, every inhale a shaky attempt to keep control of her panic. The world around her felt unreal, like she had stepped out of her own life and into someone else's nightmare. Only the ache in her wrists and the sting of her wounds reminded her she was still awake, still here, still trapped. The masked man stood in the shadows, silent and unmoving, as if weighing the choice of what to do next. his head tilted slightly, studying her the way a scientist might study an insect under glass. Behind him, the faint red blink of the camera light continued its steady pulse, like the heartbeat of the room itself. She could hear faint static crackling in the walls now, the sound of an old intercom system struggling to carry a signal. Then, without warning, a distorted voice came through, calm, cold, and entirely devoid of humanity. "She stays alive until I say otherwise." The masked man didn't respond, didn't move. The voice continued, "You know the rules, no mistakes." Then the static cut off, leaving only the low hum of the light bulb and the pounding of her pulse. Sarah tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. She forced the words out, a broken whisper. "Why me?" The masked man stepped forward, his boots crunching over shards of glass, scattered on the concrete. He stopped just inches away from her chair, close enough that she could smell the faint scent of engine oil and smoke clinging to his clothes. Slowly, he reached up and pulled off his mask. Sarah's breath froze in her lungs. It was a face she knew, not well, just in passing, a neighbor from her street, a man she'd seen walking his dog, waving politely as she left for work. The kind of person you never think about twice because they seem so ordinary, so harmless. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were dead in a way that made her stomach twist. "You don't remember, do you?" he asked, his voice quiet but steady. She shook her head, heart pounding harder. "That's the problem. You were never supposed to see anything, but you did." And now, he glanced at the camera in the corner, then back at her. "Now they don't trust you." Sarah's mind scrambled, replaying fragments of memories from the last few weeks, random noises in the alley behind her apartment, unfamiliar cars parked too long on her street, a man's voice yelling in the dark. She hadn't connected the pieces before. Now it was too late. A sudden metallic clang echoed from somewhere upstairs. The man's head snapped toward the sound, his expression tightening. The intercom crackled again and the same cold voice barked, "We have a problem. Finish it. Now." Sarah's chair scraped against the floor as she instinctively tried to back away, but the chains held her fast. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folding knife, its blade catching the dim light. Her chest tightened. This was it. But then another noise, louder this time, footsteps pounding down the stairs. The man cursed under his breath and spun toward the door just as it burst open. A figure in dark clothing charged into the room, shoving the man aside and sending the knife skittering across the floor. The newcomer didn't speak, didn't even look at Sarah at first. They grabbed the camera from the wall and yanked the wires free, cutting off the blinking red light. Only then did they turn toward her. "Come on," the stranger said, pulling a set of bolt cutters from their back. "We don't have much time." Sarah could barely process what was happening, but when the chains snapped and her hands were free, instinct took over. She stumbled to her feet, every muscle in her body screaming in protest. The masked man, no, her neighbor, was already getting back up, his eyes burning with rage. He lunged toward them, but the stranger was faster, shoving him back against the wall and slamming the door shut behind them. As they fled into the dark hallway, the air outside the basement was no less suffocating, the corridors narrow and lined with old, rusted pipes that dripped cold water onto the floor. The stranger's flashlight cut a weak beam through the darkness, bouncing off wet concrete. Somewhere behind them, the sound of pursuit began, boots striking the floor in a relentless rhythm. "Who are you?" Sarah gasped, struggling to keep up. "Someone who doesn't want you dead," the stranger said without looking back. "That's all you need to know." They turned a corner, then another, the passageways twisting like a maze designed to trap rather than lead to safety. The pounding footsteps grew closer, joined now by the echo of another set from ahead. "We're surrounded," Sarah whispered, panic rising in her throat. The stranger stopped abruptly, scanning the walls. Then they spotted it,
a narrow maintenance hatch, half hidden behind a stack of broken crates. Without hesitation, they pulled it open and gestured for her to crawl through. Sarah hesitated for only a moment before dropping to her knees and sliding into the pitch-black tunnel. The metal walls were cold against her palms, the air stale and choky. She could hear the stranger closing the hatch behind them, followed by the muffled shouts of the men who had been chasing them. They crawled in silence for what felt like forever, the tunnel sloping upward until finally, a faint glimmer of moonlight appeared ahead. When they emerged, they were outside. The cold night air hit her like a slap, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and pine. They were in the woods, the thick trees stretching high overhead and hiding the stars. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the hum of traffic, civilization, safety, life. "Go," the stranger said, handing her a flashlight. "Don't stop until you reach the road. Someone will find you." "What about you?" she asked, her voice trembling. The stranger's eyes shifted toward the darkness of the tunnel they'd just escaped. "I'm not done yet." And before she could say another word, they were gone, disappearing into the shadows. Sarah turned toward the sound of the road and began to run. She didn't look back, but she knew, even as the trees thinned and the glow of headlights appeared in the distance, that this wasn't over. Someone had let her live tonight, and that meant they had a reason she might not survive discovering. They had escaped, but the questions, they were far from answered. Who was the voice on the intercom? How many more people were part of this, and why did they let her live? The police searched the property, but the men were gone. The cameras, the wires, the tunnels stripped bare, as if they had never existed. The neighbor vanished without a trace, and the stranger who saved her was never seen again. She moved to another city, changed her name, tried to bury the memories, but some nights, she wakes to the faint sound of static in the walls and a blinking red light in the corner of her room. Maybe it's just her mind, or maybe someone is still watching. If you think you know what really happened that night, tell us in the comments. And remember, in the darkest places, not every prisoner is meant to be saved.